What if the being that my daughter described, the tall, feathered, bird-headed teacher who she said she belonged with them, wasn't new at all? What if it was the single most documented non-human intelligence in all of human history and almost nobody is talking about it? I dug through history and I found the Blue Avians' existence, the ones that my daughter speaks about, and I'm going to show you here what I found. So I want to start by telling you something that most people in this space never really say out loud. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to look at the evidence here, because what I found when I started pulling at this thread was these ancient records, the documented history, and the researchers who basically risked everything is not something that I invented, okay? It is not something that I channeled. It is sitting in public archives and you can read it for yourself. It's in academic databases, in declassified files, and in one of the most remarkable texts that was ever produced that's available for free on the internet right now that almost nobody in the mainstream has read. And by the end of this video, you're going to see something very important. You're going to see that the being that we call the Blue Avian, the tall, feathered, bird-like, bird-headed cosmic teacher that came to teach humanity about love, unity, and told my daughter that she was one of them, is not a modern idea, okay? It is the oldest documented contact experience on the planet. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. Here's the question that I want you to sit with before we go any further. We live in a world where the same image, the same type of being appears in ancient Egypt, ancient India, ancient Japan, ancient Mexico, and among the indigenous nations of North America, okay? These civilizations had no contact with each other. They didn't have any trade routes. They didn't have any shared language. They had no common mythology in any way that historians have been able to document. And yet they all described the same being, all humanoid, covered in feathers or possessing wings, bird-featured, associated with the sky and with the stars, described as a teacher, described as a protector, described as bringing wisdom, cosmic law, and healing, described as coming from above. Now, you can look at that and say, that's a coincidence, or you can look at that and ask a completely different question altogether. What if it is not a coincidence at all? What if something was actually appearing to these civilizations? What if these weren't metaphors? What if these were descriptions? That is the question that this entire video is built on. And I'm going to ask you just to suspend your disbelief till the end. And when you layer on top of those ancient records the work of a CIA-connected military-credentialed doctor who spent decades documenting children with extraordinary contact experiences, and then one of that most extraordinary channeled texts ever produced that describes exactly who these beings are and why they're here. And what you get is not a theory then. What you get is a case. Let's start at the beginning, and I mean the actual beginning, as far back as written human history goes. Ancient Egypt, 3,000 years before Christ, okay? Possibly older, we don't know. The Egyptian civilization documented more meticulously than any other ancient culture, and a being that they called Thoth. Thoth was not a peripheral figure. He was one of the most important beings in the entire Egyptian cosmology, okay? He was the god of wisdom, of knowledge, of writing, of science, of math, of magic, of the moon, and of divine judgment. He was described as the scribe of the gods, the being who recorded everything. He maintained the universe, basically. He kept the cosmic balance, and he was depicted in every temple, on every wall, in every major text, with the head of an ibis bird on a human body. Not symbolically, not as a metaphor for wisdom, as a literal description of what he looked like, okay? Now I want you to notice something. When you look at these images, the ibis, the specific bird chosen to represent Thoth, is a tall, slender, elegant bird with a long curved beak and blue-gray feathers. It is one of the very few birds that stands almost fully upright in a posture that is distinctly humanoid-like. So when you put the ibis head on a tall, slender, upright human body, what you get is a being that is tall, thin, feathered, humanoid, with a beak-like face. Sound familiar? Thoth was said to have come to Earth from beyond, from a realm the Egyptians called the Duat, which was not the underworld as historians like to translate it to, but it was a dimensional realm beyond the physical. And he came to teach. He brought the sacred sciences. He communicated in transmissions that humans received as inspiration and revelation. and he was said to return in cycles at key moments in human history. His chief temple was in the city of Hermopolis, which in Greek means city of Hermes, because when the Greeks encountered Egyptian civilization, they recognized Thoth immediately. They called him Hermes Trismegistus, thrice greatest Hermes, and attributed him to the entire body of wisdom known as the Hermetic tradition. That tradition that forms the foundation of Western esoteric knowledge. The foundational phrase of the Hermetic tradition, as above, so below. The same beings that were above were visiting what was now below. And then there is Horus, arguably the oldest documented deity of any civilization. The earliest records of his worship go back to pre-dynastic Egypt, before the pharaohs, before the pyramids, before written language. And he was the god of the sky, the sun, kingship, healing, and protection. He was depicted as a falcon, or as a man with a falcon head. A falcon, which is one of the most visually striking birds on earth, raptorial, powerful, fast, capable of seeing what humans cannot. The Eye of Horus, the most famous symbol that appears on everything from ancient temples to modern currency, was the eye of a falcon. The eye that sees from above, the eye that perceives reality from a higher vantage point, from a higher dimension. Horus was considered the intermediary between the divine realm and the human world, the being who stood between the cosmic and the earthly and made communication possible between them, right? And here's what I want you to hold on to. Egypt was not an isolated case. It was the most well-documented case, but the same being was showing up everywhere else at the same time. Let's talk about what was happening in the rest of the ancient world. While the Egyptians were carrying images of Thoth and Horus onto their temple walls, onto the other side of the world, another civilization was documenting the same being with a different name. In the Hindu tradition, one of the oldest living religious traditions on earth, with texts going back 35,000 years, but oral traditions estimated to be far older than there, is a being called Garuda. Garuda is the king of all birds. He is divine. He is described either as a gigantic bird or as a man with wings and bird-like features, an eagle man, standing upright, humanoid in form. He is a protector. He has power to travel anywhere, instantly. He possesses divine knowledge. He is the Vahana, the companion and the mount of Vishnu, the supreme deity of preservation and cosmic order. He appears in the Vedas. He appears in the Mahabharata and in the Ramayana. He is referenced in the Buddhist and Jain traditions as well, meaning three completely separate religious systems, all recognized and documented this same category of being. Okay? Today, Garuda is the national symbol of Indonesia and Thailand. It is on the official state seals of both governments. Hundreds of millions of people consider him a real divine being, not a fairy tale. Okay, now we go to Japan. The Tengu are one of the most documented supernatural beings in Japanese culture. They appear in Shinto belief, Japan's oldest spiritual tradition, and are described as kami, meaning divine beings, or spirits of great power. In their original descriptions, before later artistic stylization changed their appearance, the Tengu took forms of birds of prey with humanoid-like features, humanoid characteristics, wings, feathers, human body, bird features. They were beings who descended from above. The word Tengu literally contains the character for heaven or sky. They were associated with mountainous peaks and high places, places closest to the sky, and they possessed knowledge beyond human capability and human comprehension. And they taught. Specifically, they were known as teachers of martial arts and spiritual wisdom, and they taught to certain exceptional humans. In early Buddhist texts, Tengu were described as disruptive as forces that challenge existing religious authority. That is a pattern we will see again. When a being shows up that does not fit within the approved cosmological framework, the official religious establishment finds it threatening, calls it evil, so they call it disruptive. They call it a demon, right? They try to fit it into a category that makes it manageable. But strip away the political overlay of the religious establishment, and what you have is a bird-headed, sky-descended, humanoid being of divine wisdom who taught exceptional humans and existed beyond the normal human timeline. Now, we go to the Americas, and this is where it gets really interesting. Okay, Quetzalcoatl, the Feathered Serpent, the supreme deity of the Aztec civilization, and a central figure across multiple Mesoamerican cultures. The Maya called him Kukulkan. The Quiche Maya called him Gukmatats. Different names, same being. The name Quetzalcoatl literally means feathered serpent in Nahuatl, the Aztec language. But we look at the two animals combined. The Quetzalcoatl bird, which has the most spectacular plumage of any bird in Mesoamerica. Its brilliant, iridescent green-blue feathers that shimmer like light, combined with the serpent, which represents the earth and wisdom of the material world, right? Together, they represent a being that bridges the cosmic and the earthly, a being that is both sky and earth, both above and both below. Quetzalcoatl was the god of wisdom, of learning, of science, of arts, and of cosmic law. He was the patron of the priesthood. He was associated with the planet Venus, which is the brightest object in the sky after the sun and the moon, visible at dawn and dusk, and the transition points between day and night, between one state and another, liminal space, right? A being that appears at transitions. That is not an accident. He was described as having come from the heavens. He taught humanity agriculture, astronomy, the arts, and the calendar. He promised to return when the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 1500s and the Aztec Emperor Montezuma initially received them with extraordinary deference. This was because there was a prophecy that Quetzalcoatl would return from the east in a specific year. The Spaniards arrived in that year. The entire trajectory of one history's greatest civilization collapses was partly shaped by the belief in the return of the feathered sky-born cosmic teacher. And then in North America, the Thunderbird, which is one of the most widely documented beings in North America and the indigenous tradition. It appears among the Pacific Northwestern cultures and the Algonquin people, Iroquois nations, Great Plains cultures, Great Lakes peoples, and Southwestern cultures. Dozens of completely separate indigenous nations with their own distinct languages and traditions, all documented the same type of being. Petroglyphs, rock carvings depicting this thunderbird have been found and dated to over 4,000 years ago. Near Twin Bluffs, Wisconsin, throughout the Pacific Northwest, across the plains. This thunderbird is described as a supernatural bird of prey or a human bird hybrid of immense power, a protector being. It was said to create thunder by flapping its wings, sound traveling through space as it moved. It was associated with lightning, with electrical phenomenon, with energy. It operated at the boundary between the sky world and the human world. It intervened on humanity's behalf. It expected respect and relationship in return. In ceremonial traditions, the thunderbird is not just a creature. It is a presence, a divine intelligence that interacts with humanity from above. 5 civilizations: Egypt, India, Japan, Mesoamerica, North America. No documented contact between them in these ancient periods, okay? No shared language, no trade routes that could have explained a shared mythology here. And yet, the same being, tall, immense, avian featured, humanoid, bird-like hybrid, associated with the sky, a teacher, a protector, a cosmic intelligence, operating at the same interface between the divine and the human. I want you to think about what it would take for that pattern to be coincidental. I want you to genuinely try to calculate the statistical probability that 5 completely isolated human civilizations across thousands of miles and thousands of years independently invented the same specific category of non-human being. Because I did that calculation in my own mind, and I stopped believing that it was a coincidence a long time ago. The question that I started asking is this: if this pattern is not a coincidence, if this something was actually appearing to humanity across these civilizations, then at some point in the modern era, someone with resources, credentials, and institutional support would have noticed that pattern and started investigating it. Guess what? That's exactly what happened. His name was Andrij Puharich, and I need you to understand who Andrij Puharich was before I tell you what he did. because the temptation when I describe his work is to dismiss it as fringe. And I'm telling you right now that would be a mistake. That would be the wrong call. Andrij Puharich was born in Chicago in 1918. I believe he earned his medical degree from Northwestern. In 1947, he served as captain in the United States Army Medical Corps. He was stationed at Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland, which was then and remains today one of the most classified military research facilities in the United States, okay? So during his time there, he was in regular contact with high-ranking members of the Pentagon, the CIA, and naval intelligence. Dang. He was not a hippie, guys. He was not a New Age enthusiast. He was a decorated military doctor with active ties to the American intelligence establishment. And he was also, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting, obsessed with the question that the military establishment considered strategically important. And that was, could psychic phenomenon be weaponized? Could psychic contact with non-human intelligences give the United States an advantage over the Soviet Union? In 1952, while still embedded within the Pentagon and the CIA, Puharich held a research session with a Hindu mystic named Durandija. Vinod, I'm mispronouncing this, but during the session, Vinod entered a trance state, and the entity that came through himself identified not as a spirit, not as a ghost, not as a deceased person, but as a group, intelligence, that called itself the Nine. The Nine described themselves as a council of 9 cosmic intelligences who had been involved in humanity's development, basically, since before recorded history. They described themselves as responsible for the knowledge given to ancient civilizations. They described themselves as operating from a dimension beyond the physical world. Puharich documented everything. This was not a spiritual seeking session. This was scientific research to him, with a military doctor in a laboratory setting. Now, I want to be honest with you here because I always am. Puharich's work was controversial. His critics in the scientific establishment called him credulous. They said he believed too easily. Some of what he documented cannot be verified. But here is what cannot be disputed. A U.S. Army credentialed doctor with active CIA connections in a military research context documented contact with what he described as cosmic intelligences, and he took it seriously enough to spend the rest of his life investigating it. And then, here's where it gets interesting, in the 70s, he did something that changed the entire trajectory of my understanding of what I have been witnessing in my own life and my daughter's life. He found the children. In the early to mid-70s, Puharich began identifying, and this is documented in his papers and discussed widely by his contemporaries, a group of children from around the world who demonstrated what he called exceptional psychic abilities, like my daughter. Children who appeared to receive transmissions. Children who communicated contact with non-human intelligences. Children who knew things that they had no ordinary means of knowing. He called them the Space Kids. Andrij Puharich's documented research program in the 1970s, children from multiple countries assembled around his estate in Ossining, New York. And the subject was anomalous psychic ability and apparent non-human contact, okay? He assembled these children at his estate, I'm not saying this is a good thing, but conducted documented research on their abilities. And he brought them in from different countries. He worked with them individually and in groups. And he documented what they said, what they saw, and what they transmitted. These were children who claimed to receive communications from these cosmic beings. Children who described contact that matched descriptions from adult contactees. Children who could not, in any conventional explanation, have coordinated their reports, just like my daughter did not. She didn't know any of this stuff. Here's the pattern he had identified by the time he reached the Space Kids program. Non-human intelligence, wherever they are, appear to communicate most clearly through individuals with the least amount of psychic and cognitive filtering, children. Before the full weight of cultural conditioning and institutional education closes down their perceptual range, often report experiences that adults have been trained to dismiss. Puharich's research led him to believe that certain children were born with what he called open channels, just like my daughter, just like Kelly's daughter Bray. and many others, and perceptual architecture that allowed contact to come in through a way that adult minds typically block. And he was not alone in noticing this. Uri Geller, the Israeli psychic who Puharich brought to the United States for CIA-funded scientific investigation, had his first demonstrated abilities as a child. Peter Hurkos, the Dutch psychic Puharich studied, experienced his activation following an accident, okay? My daughter had her experiences at age 3. Again and again in the case histories Puharich assembled, the contact or the activation of the extraordinary ability happened early. It happened young. It happened before the world had fully told these individuals what it was and what it was not possible. And during his investigation of Uri Geller, the most extensively documented case Puharich ever worked on, something appeared in their sessions that I want to specifically name for this video. Under hypnotic regression, documented by Puharich and later published in his 1974 book simply titled Uri, Geller described being a vessel for contact with intelligences that came from a specific cosmic source intelligence that described their role as guiding human evolution. Exactly what they said to my daughter. As preparing humanity for a transition and as operating through selected individuals who had been, in other words, placed here for this purpose. The intelligence described in this mission using language that will sound immediately familiar to anyone who has spent time in the consciousness space. Preparing humanity, guiding evolution, operating through chosen individuals, placed here for a purpose. This is not Corey Good's language from 2014, okay? This is documented language from a CIA-funded scientific investigation in 1972. And I'm not telling you Puharich got everything right, and I'm not telling you he did it ethically. I'm not telling you to take every claim that he made at face value. But I am telling you that a U.S. Army-credentialed, CIA-connected medical doctor spent decades investigating exactly the phenomenon that we were talking about in this video. That he documented his findings rigorously. That his work involved children with apparent contact experiences, and that the intelligence that he documented was describing a mission and a purpose. My daughter says this, that maps with remarkable precision onto what the ancient civilizations I described earlier were carving into stone thousands of years ago. A teaching mission, a guiding mission, operating through selected humans and specifically through children who had not yet been taught to close the door. If you have ever had a child in your life who seemed to know things that they shouldn't have known, who described experiences that had no ordinary explanation, who came into this world already carrying something like a mission that you could feel but not explain, you have one of these kids that would have been sought after by Puharich, but now they have more protection. They come in with it. And the question that I ask at this point in this investigation is, what did these beings actually say that they were, and what did they say that they came here for? Because the answer to that question is sitting in one of the most remarkable documents ever produced. A document that almost nobody in the mainstream has read. A document that was channeled in 1981 by a physics professor and 2 researchers in a controlled, scientifically documented setting. And it answers, in the clearest possible language I have ever encountered, exactly who the Blue Avians are. In January of 1981 in Louisville, Kentucky, a physics professor named Don Elkins sat across from a woman named Carla Rucker and began asking questions, okay? Don Elkins was not a spiritual seeker in the popular sense. He had a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in mechanical engineering. He was a professor of physics. He had spent the previous decade collecting and analyzing UFO reports with scientific methodology, building actual databases, interviewing witnesses, looking for patterns, things like that. And he'd been working with channels and with psychics for years and was frustrated. Most of what came through was vague, okay, untestable, or internally inconsistent. He was about to give up on the whole project, and then he met Carla Rucker. And she went into a state of deep trance, and she said something that stopped everything. The being that came through identified itself by saying, "I am Ra. I have not spoken through this instrument before." We had to wait until she was precisely tuned as we send a narrow band vibration. We greet you in the love and the light of our infinite Creator. And then We are old upon your planet. We have served with varying degrees of success in transmitting the law of one, of unity, of singleness to your peoples. We have walked your earth. We have seen the faces of your peoples. We have walked your earth and seen the faces of your peoples, you guys. This was not a human spirit. This was not a deceased relative, not an angelic being from a religious tradition. This was an intelligence that claimed to have been on this planet before, physically present on Earth in a form that humans could see, and that was returning now in this channeled format, because the time was important. Don Elkins asked the obvious question. He asked about Egypt, and Elkins asked, I've heard of the name Ra in connection with the Egyptians. Are you connected with that Ra in any way? Ra answered, yes. The connection is congruency. Then in session 1.5, we as a group, or what you would call a social memory complex, made contact with a race of your planetary kind, which you call Egyptians. Others from our density made contact at the same time in South America, and the so-called lost cities were their attempts to contribute to the law of one. And we spoke to the one who heard and understood and was in a position to decree the law of one. However, the priests and the peoples of that era quickly distorted our message, robbing it of the compassion with the unity which it was informed by its very nature. Read that again. Ra, the intelligence, speaking through Carlo Rucker in 1981, was directly claiming to be the same Ra that ancient Egypt documented as a falcon-headed solar deity. And they were saying that when they visited physically, the human priesthood distorted their message. Okay, they turned it into a religion. The message became the religion. The teaching became doctrine. And the cosmic law became a system of control. They left because they found themselves in, and I am reading their exact words, the hypocritical position of being acclaimed as other than your other selves. They left because people started worshiping them instead of understanding them. Now, I want to tell you what Ra said. They looked and what they look like, because this is part of the law of one that almost nobody discusses. And it is the part that I believe is the key, really, to understanding everything. In session 6, Don Elkins asked Ra for a historical background on where they came from before Earth. Ra answered, I am, with the social memory complex of which I am a part of, one of those who voyaged outward from another planet within your own solar system. The planetary influence was that you call Venus. We are a race old in your measures. When we were at sixth dimension in our physical beings were what you would call golden. We were tall and somewhat delicate. Our physical body complex covering what you would call the integument had a golden luster, tall, somewhat delicate, a golden covering or a luminous integument. Six-dimensional beings from Venus, which in this context means their consciousness originated in the dimensional space associated with that planetary sphere, not the physical surface. They describe their form as a density-specific physical manifestation that they could clothe themselves in when visiting Earth. A replica of their sixth density form made visible in third density so that humans could perceive them, right? And then in the same session, Ra describes why they built the pyramids. They built them as energetic structures, crystal charged, geometrically precise devices designed to balance and transmit the incoming energies of cosmic law into the earth. And when the human priesthood took over the structures and used them for personal power instead of collective elevation, Ra withdrew. Pyramid after pyramid charged by the crystal and initiated were designed to balance the incoming energy of the one creator with the many and multiple distortions of this planetary mind, body, spirit. And then there's an extraordinary moment in session 6 when Ra is asked why they are communicating again now in 1981. Why return? Why now? Ra says, we have walked among your people. We remember sorrow. We have seen much. And then we searched for an instrument of the proper parameters of distortion in mind, body, complex, spirit, and supporting and understanding your group of mind, body, spirit complexes to accept this information with minimal distortion and maximal desire to serve for some of your years. They searched for years for the right person, with the right mind, with the right support system to bring this information through cleanly. And that is not what a made-up entity says. Okay, that is what intelligence with a specific purpose and specific requirement says. And I want to tell you what the law of one says about the densities, because this is the framework that connects everything that we have discussed in this video. Ra teaches that consciousness evolves through a series of densities or dimensions. The third density, where we are now, is the density of self-awareness, of choice, of learning through catalyst and through experience. The fourth density is the density of love and understanding. The fifth is wisdom. The sixth is love and wisdom in unity. And Ra describes themselves as six density beings. And they describe the mission of six density beings towards third density beings toward us in a very specific way. Six density entities who have reached a sufficient level of unity consciousness begin to feel, as they put it, a calling from lower densities, a pull towards service, and a recognition of that the lower densities need assistance in their evolution, and so they answer that calling. They don't impose, they don't intervene without invitation. They respond to a call. The ancient Egyptians called. The ancient Mesoamericans called. The indigenous peoples of North America called. And throughout every case, what showed up from above, bearing wisdom, wearing feathers, answered. In session 7, Ra describes what they call the distortion of service. They say their purpose is equivalent to the calling divided by the free will of those who are not aware of the unity of creation. What that means in simpler language is this: the clearer the call, the more precisely they can answer it. The greater the distortion, the more the requesting consciousness is confused or filtered through less cleanly. They can come through, but this is why the children matter. The children call with less distortion. Children have not yet built the layers of intellectual skepticism, of cultural programming, and of defensive self-protection that cause adults to immediately reject what their deeper awareness is receiving. A child who experiences contact with a sixth density intelligence is not doing something unusual. They are doing something that Ra describes as a natural result of a clear, open, unfiltered signal. And Puharich understood this from the research. Ra described it from the cosmic end. They arrived at the very same conclusion from completely different directions. Children are cleaner channels, just like my daughter. And through human history, we have beings who have documented as Thoth, as Horus, as Garuda, as the Tengu, as Quetzalcoatl, as the Thunderbird, have been looking for the clearest possible signal to come through the law of one. That was produced between 1981 and 1984. Don Elkins, Carla Ruckert, and Jim McCarty conducted 106 sessions in total. The full transcripts are available for free on lawofone.info. Every session is there, every question, every answer. You can read it tonight. I am not asking you to believe this. I'm asking you to read it and notice what you feel when you do. Because what I notice when I put this all together next to the ancient records, when I put it together to Puharich's work, and when I put it together next to what I have personally witnessed with my daughter and documented, it is that these sources are describing the same thing, the same being, the same mission, the same pattern of contact, the same explanation for why children carry this so cleanly, and the same warning that the message will always be distorted by those who benefit from not understanding it. So let me bring this home. We have documented avian beings, tall, feathered, humanoid, sky-descended cosmic teachers in ancient Egypt, ancient India, ancient Japan, ancient Mexico, and across North America. We have documented CIA-connected military-credentialed medical doctor who spent decades investigating contact with non-human intelligences, who identified specific children with extraordinary abilities and contact experiences, who built framework for understanding why children carry this experience most clearly, right? And now we have a channeled text produced by a physics professor and 2 researchers in a controlled setting over 3 years, publicly available in its entirety right now. in which a 6th density intelligence calling itself Ra describes in detail where they are from, what they look like, when they physically visited Earth, why they built the pyramids, why they left, and why they are trying to communicate again. What the densities of consciousness are, and why, in every age, in the clearest contact comes through those who have not yet been taught to close the door. I didn't make any of this up. I found it, and I believe, based on years of direct personal experience, and that what experiences with my daughter, and this and all of these sources are pointing to is real. I believe the Blue Avians are not a new idea invented in the internet age. I believe they are the oldest documented beings in human contact history, showing up across every civilization that was paying close enough attention to write them down. And I believe Puharich knew, I believe the ancient Egyptians knew, and I believe the Aztec priests knew, and I believe the indigenous elders knew, and I believe that my daughter knows. And I believe that if you have made it to the end of this video, if something in here resonated at a level deeper than intellect, that you already know too. This is not the end of this investigation. This is the beginning of it. If you want to go deeper, the Law of One is free at lawofone.info. Start at session 1 and read slowly and ask questions. The message that has been trying to reach humanity for thousands of years is still being sent. The question is whether or not you're ready to receive it. And I'll see you on the next one. I love you guys.